Hey, all you feminines out there, this is RJ.
And this is Leigh.
And we are here with another episode of File 741 for you. We're getting a little intellectual today. We are doing quote-unquote historical fiction, graphic novels. I say emphasis on the fiction because while the stories have basis in like real events, sometimes there are vampires. So, that's how it goes sometimes.
And I think there's a romantic twist as well to some of these, which is also interesting.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. So we've got 3 graphic novels we're going to talk about today. The first one is called Queen of the Sea, and that is written and illustrated by Dylan McConis. And I actually didn't realize she is based in Portland, so I was reading the little blurb of her stuff, and it said, she said a thank you to Multnomah County. And I was like, that's in Oregon. So that's kind of cool. Maybe someday I can meet her. But I had actually read this graphic novel a while ago. I want to say a couple of years. And I was just so struck by the artwork and the story I found really interesting, and the way that the characters are developed and the way the story is told. So when Leigh and I were talking about what to do for this month's theme, I thought it would be cool to add this into kind of what we were already looking at. So, Leigh, do you want to do our typical synopsis? Or if you don't have it, I have it.
Yes. So it says here, Margaret has lived on the island for as long as she can remember, and she loves every inch of it, from the mysterious stone circle left by the old people to the windswept beach where she and the Elysian, I believe, is how that's pronounced. Elysian sisters await the ship that brings supplies to their remote convent home. But everything changes when 2 new arrivals appear on the island. First, William, who will become her dear friend, then Eleanor, who will upend her peaceful existence. Regal, demanding, and ferociously intelligent, Eleanor is the former queen of Albion, banished to the island by the half-sister who has stolen her throne. But Eleanor is no passive exile, and soon Margaret is caught up in her schemes, which put them both in grave danger and reveal startling truths about the island. Inspired by the early years of Queen Elizabeth, the first of England, or the first Queen of England, and interwoven with fascinating details of the 16th century convent life, this beautifully highly illustrated novel of an alternate history will transport readers to a world of secrets, intrigue, and thrilling adventure. Well put.
Very good job. You should read audiobooks.
I have considered that, but I think I would get in my head and then start jumbling my words all the time.
Fair enough. Well, you did a wonderful job.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess historical fiction is one way that you can say the theme of what we're talking about this month, but also kind of alternative universe fiction. But yeah, so I really love this graphic novel. I think the style and the colors are so beautiful and interesting. Like, it really kind of makes you feel like you're immersed in this world. And I also especially love, there's kind of a few varied ways of storytelling, like when they're specifically, like when Margaret is telling stories about things that happened before, like with the old people or with Saint Alicia, I think, there's a different art style that is very much like tapestry.
Yes.
And so I really like that there's a little bit of that separation of like, okay, now this person is telling a story. Here is kind of what that story would have looked like if it was being portrayed in that time. So that's something that I really, really liked.
Yeah, and I also really enjoy, like, each panel is its own watercolor masterpiece. It's really quite beautiful. This must have taken forever to illustrate.
Yeah.
And I also, like, for the most part, the characters' faces are very similarly drawn and things like that, and there's not a ton of like different expressions, but then there's Eleanor, whose expressions you can just like feel searing off the page. I mean, the amount of like really, I don't know how to describe it, but like, you know, annoyed and upset, anger, or those sneering expressions. I'm like, oh my god, like that's really hard to convey so well in imagery, like, or in a comic like that. But the artist really does do a fantastic job of showing every single sneer. So yeah, I really enjoy the amount of expression, and in a watercolor that's hard to do as well. Something that's not like
Yeah,
so detailed like that, but you can really feel her character's anger through this story.
yeah, I would also say too, Margaret is very expressive, being the
Mm-hmm.
main character and being the person who the story is being told through.
Mm-hmm.
And then also I would say Sister Agnes, who's the prioress
Mm-hmm.
of the convent,
Mm-hmm.
is very expressive as well. She
Mm-hmm.
always looks kind of sad and kind
Mm-hmm.
of like resigned.
Yeah.
And then when Mother Mary Clarence, who is there as Eleanor's keeper, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
She also has some really, really great facial expressions.
Yeah.
When Eleanor first shows up, they don't necessarily know, or Margaret doesn't know that she's the former queen of Albion.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point, Eleanor does like a hunger strike
Mm-hmm.
so that she can get out of her room. And Mother Mary Clarence comes in and is like, I knew you would do this. Like, you're such a baby. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I can't believe you're so demanding. And like, who's going to keep you company? There's nobody here that wants to spend time with you. And then when Margaret is like, well, I can do it, she like shoots her this look over her shoulder that's like, daggers. Like she's just like,
Yeah.
"Are you kidding?" But then she like can't really say no. So yeah, there's moments that really really stand out. Like
Mm-hmm.
you said, every page is beautiful,
Mm-hmm.
and there's some really really beautiful like double page spreads or like single page spreads. But yeah, there's these little highlighted moments that really convey the emotion and the turmoil that's kind of happening,
Yeah.
especially the first part of the book is Margaret just kind of talking about her life on the island, and oh,
Mm-hmm.
she came here as a baby, she doesn't know who her parents are, she was raised in this convent. And then William shows up, who is Scottish, like a Scottish stand-in kind
Mm-hmm.
of. And so his family is in prison, and so he got sent to the island because his mother did, and he was allowed to stay with his mother until he came of age. So then it's just kind of them having adventures, but
Mm-hmm.
things really kind of come to a head when William leaves and then Eleanor shows up. And so um yeah, it's just the way that the story is told is very compelling. Sometimes you think that these kind of like historical stories just aren't that interesting. But as we know, uh, you and I would go to the Shakespeare Festival in
Mm-hmm.
Colorado, and they really would make the histories really engaging and really fun and pretty easy to follow. So I think the author does a really good job of that here, making sure everything is simple enough to be well understood, but also there's this level of intricacy, and you don't need to have a historical context. She gives it to you as you're reading.
Yeah, I was just thinking as I was reading it too. I'm like, oh, no wonder RJ loves this one. It's very Shakespearean, so I very
Yes.
much enjoyed that. And from a historical standpoint, like I was telling you earlier, I had just started watching Rain. And a couple years ago, I think, wasn't it Mary Queen of Scots was a popular movie as
Mhm.
well. And even Outlander touches on things every now and then. Yeah, so this story of the time when Margaret or Mary is held at the convent is not the part of the story that is usually the focus of her life,
Right.
and so we don't really get to see that in the movies or TV shows. So I thought this was a really interesting take of, oh yeah, what was it like on the convent, island? I mean, people think that that's not the most adventurous and the most interesting, but I thought it was fascinating. I loved how
Yeah,
each of the
absolutely.
nuns were, which she finds later, were not actual nuns, that they're all captives, and this is like a prison of sorts for women, and how each of them had done something against the crown, well, thought to be against the crown, and that's what got them banished here and, having to take up this life as a nun, not as a choice, which I think
Right.
was very interesting to find out. That's when the book really, I was like, oh my. Um, so,
Well, and especially when because you find out, of course, that it's the men in the lives of these women who are
hmm
nuns. They are the ones that did something against the crown. So of course the women are the ones who are punished. Because that's how that works.
yeah.
I actually had a question for you. So one thing that I found really interesting is like the religious aspect of
hmm
this book. It doesn't feel particularly like it doesn't feel like the author is necessarily saying like, "Oh, I'm Catholic," or kind of whatever
hmm
Church of England kind of is this religious aspect, but we are seeing and hearing the story from the perspective of somebody who grew up in this order, who grew up believing in God and the saints and the saint of their order. And so it feels like that is being told through the experience of this young person, and
hmm
that's who and that's how it was grown up. So I didn't know if you kind of had the same sense, if you were like the religious aspect of it is almost secondary, like it's just kind of a part of the world and not necessarily integral to the story. I mean, it is because that's the world they're living in, but you know, it's interesting to see like the characters, like the nuns. Some of them became nuns voluntarily, and then some of them, of course, had to take vows in order to like stay on the island and
hmm
not die. But there are some of them who are definitely more religious than others.
Yeah, I also feel it was a secondary thing. I feel like most of the conversations that they have about like why they're doing things or what they're doing at a particular time is just to kind of show the routines. I mean, I think when you're on an
Mm-hmm.
island by yourselves every day, the routines are what help get you through each day type thing because I mean, they don't it's not like they have clocks or anything like that. So, even there was that page that's a big circle that says the things that they do at that time to let them know
Oh
what time
yeah.
of day it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was interesting too. And that, tended to be a bit of a religious activity that happened at each hour or something like that so that they knew that that was the time that they were supposed to be doing that. But a lot of the too was also like, this is the time where we go and pick plants or this is the time when we it's like a chore that happens at that time
Right.
too. So I think it was an interesting blend of like religious routines and just community living routines.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it didn't feel super Catholic to me. Coming from a Lutheran background, that felt more Lutheran because it focused so much on the
Mm-hmm.
community aspect. Whereas I don't always feel that way about Catholic. And there's we didn't see a lot of like confessing of sins and punishment with rosaries and you know what I mean, like what you usually see with Catholic things like that. Not to stereotype Catholics. I apologize if I'm doing that. That's not the point. I'm just going off of what we see a lot in media that's
Mm-hmm.
supposedly Catholic, not necessarily what it really is, probably. But and also this is a different time period, which is very different from what it is now. So,
Right. I also liked bringing in the old people. So, like,
hmm
when Eleanor, or not Eleanor, when Margaret finds the cave with William and they find the pictographs inside
yeah,
um,
hmm
of the people that had lived on this island before it was, turned into this convent prison. And that's where the stone table comes from. And,
hmm
I think even at one point, one of the sisters says, "Oh yeah, some of the things we do are influenced by the old people," and so it just is an interesting look at how paganism kind of really got swept up into kind of organized religion around that
hmm
time. There was just a lot of mixing and matching, which is kind of cool.
yeah, and I also
Um,
think that them being separated on an island and not constantly being updated on what's happening in the world or the changes that are happening within the church, like they just stick to what they know type thing.
right. Yeah. Yeah, and as you were talking about that, that made me think of Sister Act, one of my favorite movies. It's excellent, and it's kind of the same thing where you're like you're kind of everything takes place like in this convent, but it's not about religion,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
It's really about getting to know these people and kind of why they're there and why they are invested in their community and what they want to do. So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of a fun little connection there. So yeah, it's definitely, I would say, probably for slightly younger readers, maybe like 10 to 15,
Mm-hmm.
but could be enjoyed by everyone. Like I said, beautiful art, really interesting story. And, you know, like you said, you're starting to watch Rain. There's ways that you can connect it to the actual history that is pretty interesting as well.
Yeah, like the first episode just shows that she's at the convent, and it's like literally 3 minutes. And then we get into the real story, and I'm like, but wait.
But wait,
That
there is
story
a
is
whole
interesting
story.
too.
Yeah. Yeah, so definitely highly recommend. Um, Beautiful, and I really hope that this author has done more. I need to look more into that. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Our next comic that we're going to be talking about, or graphic novel, I guess is more accurate, is The Thrilling Adventures of Lovelace and Babbage, or Lovelace.
I'm not
I never
sure.
actually, I figured it would just be Loveless because
Mm-hmm.
of British people, but anyway, Lovelace and Babbage, the mostly true story of the first computer by Sidney Padua. And Sidney Padua is really interesting. She was a animator, and then she went into digital animation. So she kind of talks about how doing this comic was a way for her to kind of get back into the 2D style that she used to do.
Mm-hmm.
But Leigh, why don't you tell us what it's about?
Meet Victorian London's most dynamic duo, Charles Babbage, the unrealized inventor of the computer, and his accomplice, Ada, Countess of Lovelace, the peculiar photo programmer and daughter of Lord Byron. When Lovelace translated a description of Babbage plans for an enormous mechanical calculating machine in 1842, she added annotations 3 times longer than the original work. Her footnotes contained the first appearance of the general computing theory 100 years before an actual computer was built. Sadly, Lovelace died of cancer a decade before publishing the paper, and Babbage never built any of his machines. But do not despair. The Thrilling Adventures of Lovelace and Babbage presents rollicking alternative reality in which Lovelace and Babbage do build the difference engine, and then use it to build runaway economic models, battle the scourge of spelling errors, explore the wilder realms of mathematics, and of course fight crime. And for the sake of both London and science, complete with extensive footnotes that rival those penned by Lovelace herself, historical curiosities, and never before seen diagrams of Babbage, a mechanical steam powered computer. The Thrilling Adventures of Lovelace and Babbage is a wonderfully whimsical, utterly unusual, and above all, entirely irresistible.
Yeah, so this comic is really a lot of fun. It is super dense. So, Leigh and I were talking about how it's actually pretty difficult to get through. And so I had read it again a few years ago and really enjoyed it. But as I was rereading it, I would definitely recommend for any new readers to ignore the footnotes and endnotes the first time you read it and just kind of let the little vignettes wash over you. Again, much like Shakespeare, you're not going to get some of it,
Mm-hmm.
and some of the jokes are going to go over your head. But if you just kind of let yourself be immersed in the world, then on your second or third or fifth reading, then you can dive a little bit more into the footnotes and the endnotes and all of that stuff to kind of get the detail and the insight, especially because there's a lot of pretty good jokes in there as well. But it can definitely feel very overwhelming. So this is a really interesting story to me because I have a little bit of background in computer programming. Just when I was doing my program for UX design, I had to learn, you know, a little bit about coding in general and computing, and not a lot of history, but definitely the name Ada Lovelace came up several times as, you know, some people believe that she is considered the first computer programmer, but of course some people dispute that because there wasn't actually a computer that was built. She just like wrote this theoretical program for it. So there's some things in this that I find really interesting in terms of, you know, she devised this system of punch cards, which is how the first computers, digital computers, were used, with these punch cards, and then kind of the way that you can insert this calculation. And then I also didn't know, this is getting a little heady, but so I knew about like Boolean. That's like how Google works, is like you have your Boolean diagram. So you have like your and your ors, and it helps, you know, find what you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And so, of course, that was a real person. And so there's a little comic in here that kind of introduces Boole as a person, which I thought was really fun. So yeah, there's just so much in here. It's very overwhelming, but it's a lot of fun. So like one of my favorite jokes is on page 41. So she starts the comic being like, okay, this is how it really happened. You know, Ada Lovelace was the daughter of Lord Byron. Lord Byron, of course, was a notorious rake, as we all know. Very sexual, pansexual, like poet, you know, drunk, probably addicted to some drugs. And so when Ada was born, everybody was like, oh my God, she can't turn out like her father. And so they kind of turned her toward mathematics as a way to stifle her creative and wild side. But that kind of set her off on this path of being a brilliant mathematician. She just used, you know, her particular genius in a different way. So the beginning of the comic tells us the true story of kind of what happened. Unfortunately, Ada Lovelace died of cancer fairly young, and of course Charles Babbage never actually built his difference engine or the analytical engine. And so then Sidney Padua is like, well, guess what? It doesn't matter because we have created this little pocket universe in which these things actually did happen. And so it says on this page, like, conservation of information, current cosmological theory holds that universes are ultimately composed not of matter or energy, but of information. Due to budget constraints, the Time Police have had limited storage for the information making up the pocket universe. And so, like, she was like, so these things had to be compressed, like color information has been discarded. And so the whole comic is in black and white. And so, like, vast amounts of time in our universe are wasted in processes providing no entertainment value whatsoever. Fortunately, it has been found that the pocket universe functions fairly coherently as a series of still frames with the boring bits between omitted. So, like, just the layers and layers of kind of humor and creativity and brilliance within this comic, I just really, really appreciate. So, it's, like I said, very Shakespearean, very Victorian. A lot of jokes pertain to the time period, and so you're gonna just have to go with it and see where it takes you.
I like the way that I probably should have talked to you about this before I started delving into it because I got frustrated very easily. But I like your way of, because I try to read everything on the page, and that's what got so overwhelming. So I do like the idea of just reading the comic parts and ignoring the footnotes, and then like maybe going back and doing that. And I didn't do it that way, so I think that's why I got frustrated. But one thing, folks, that you don't know that I'm going to fill you in on is one of the reasons why I so enjoy doing theater and stuff like that with RJ is because I learned so much. One of the last times that we were able to go to the Shakespeare Festival, they were also having that exhibit of the first folio
Oh yeah.
And I think, I mean, I enjoyed the exhibit. If I would have gone on my own or with somebody else, I still would have found, you know, like the costumes and everything very interesting. But I mean, just what you say when you're walking around, I was like, oh my gosh, I've learned just so much in this hour. Like, so like RJ is just a wealth of knowledge with Shakespearean things or things that are historical like this. And so you help me appreciate these things so much more than doing it on my own. So yeah, that's something you don't know, folks, and I wish you had. But yeah, I have a wealth of knowledge here when it comes to these kinds of things. So when things are a little bit over my head, I find that you have a really fantastic job of simplifying it and making it into little bite-sized bits that I'm like, oh, okay, I get that now. Because I didn't have a lot of historical context of these two characters. It wasn't something that was discussed much when I was in school. So, yeah, I wish I would have known more because it's fascinating. Like I said, I didn't come from, I mean, we went to school, well, not you, you're younger than me. I went to school in the 80s and 90s, you know, when computers were just barely coming along. So there wasn't a lot of history, you know,
Yeah.
computer technology history, because we were just barely trying to figure out how to get that big black floppy disk to skinny thing shoved into that computer and playing Oregon Trail.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Those are the kinds with the black screen and the green.
Yep. The
Yeah,
little green.
yeah, and the
across the
dot
screen,
printers
yeah.
that were loud as hell, with the little circles on the side. Yeah, so I mean, this was not a thing. We didn't get that in school. So.
Yeah. Well, I think you know, that's why I love this comic so much. Is because so like there's a scene where George Eliot, the writer, who of course not many people knew that it was a woman writing under a pseudonym. Um, Charles Babbage is like, "Hey, we're going to use our new machine to find typographical and spelling errors and grammatical errors in people's works." And so it takes her manuscript and she's like, no, that's not what I wanted. And so in order for it to not be destroyed, she goes into the machine to try and catch it, and she gets lost. And so there's like these little speakers so that people can talk to each other inside and outside of the machine. And she's like, what do I do? And they're like, oh, have you consulted the manual? And she was like, no. And so Babbage is like, it is written in my mechanical notation naturally. As the engine is in continual motion, it was necessary for me to invent a system of signs by which to convey all its possible states. As you can see, it is at once simple, expressive, and instantly understood. A glance of the eye should be sufficient to guide you. And it's like this really complicated diagram, and then she just like looks up at this like super complicated machine. And I feel like that's kind of how it feels like as a reader sometimes when you're reading this comic. You're like, okay, sure. Like, I see what you're going for. But on that note, we can kind of get out of the weeds here and talk about the art style, because that's something that I really, really love about this comic. There's this kind of hurried, like, I have other things I need to do kind of quality that perfectly matches the tone of the story. You know, it's pen and ink as far as I can tell. You know, Leigh's the artist, she's got the expertise on that end. And so it's a little bit cartoony. It does feel a little bit like political cartoons sometimes.
Yes.
And so like it definitely has this really kind of fun vibe that makes you feel both like involved, and also like if you tried to have a conversation with Ada Lovelace and Charles Babbage, it would just be incomprehensible. Like it would just be going a million miles an hour and you would have no idea what was happening. So I think the way that it's illustrated perfectly matches the style of the subject, which I really like.
Yeah, it totally had like a old-timey newspaper feel.
Yeah.
Or like an early encyclopedia feel. I felt like it would be a giant book that I could barely carry, and then when you set it down, all the dust comes out, you know. No, that's exactly how that felt, which I liked. You know, that really set the tone for it. And you know, the cartoons were real tiny and short. if you think about it, for each page. So, I mean, for the amount of huge detail of words underneath it, the cartoon itself was quite simplified. Yeah, art style wise, I enjoyed it. I thought that was really well done. I do like a good pen and ink simplified, but yet it's very detailed because those machines, I mean, had so much going on. So they crammed a lot of information in this book and in these comics.
Yeah. I also especially love the way that cats are illustrated. There's like a whole section where a cat gets into the machine and is like playing with the stuff, and they're trying to hold it back, and it's like, no, let me in there. And just it's really very funny. And then also one of my favorite jokes is the Queen Victoria comes to check on the machine and to kind of see what it's doing, and they like show her all these calculations and are like, here's all the things it can do, and she's like, well, how does that help anything? She's like, does this lower crime? Like, how do we use this for practical purposes? And they're like, and then Ada Lovelace goes in and puts in a program to make it print a picture of a cat, and they're just like, ooh, kitty. And so it's like this great like insight into the power of computers and like what we can do with them. And then sometimes I'll just watch cat videos, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this comic is definitely a lot. I ended up buying it because I did want it for my shelf, but that will allow me to delve back in. So like I said, it's really fun to kind of get swept into and just go along for the ride. And then when you have the time and headspace to go back for deeper dives to really kind of learn more about the history and the background. And it really does actually give you some pretty cool information about modern computing and how some things are the same and how far we've come. So highly recommend, but definitely go in knowing that it's a lot.
Oh, and I can't imagine the amount of research she had to do to create this. I mean, as I've said in many, podcasts before, I have a lifetime dream of making my own graphic novel. I've done short comics, but I've never done anything past 3 or 4 pages. And so, that just seems daunting to me. So the fact that this one had the amount of research, I'm like, that's a commitment. So,
well, and the thing is, Sydney Padua makes it seem so effortless.
Yes.
Like, there's definitely, like, you can definitely tell, like, obviously research was done, and she talks specifically about where she found some of the things that she uses as sources, but she also just makes it seem like she knows all of these things. So when you're reading it, it's both like very dense and a little bit hard to comprehend, but it's also very conversational in some way. It's not like, here are these things. It's like, here's this really interesting thing that influenced this particular comic. So I think it's a lot of fun, and would that we lived in the world in which the analytical engine and the difference engine were created, and Ada Lovelace was able to write that program, and it'd be really interesting to see where we would be today.
Yeah, this is one of those ones that I would like to speak to the author about, because I always enjoy when people get really excited about their stuff or things that they're passionate about, even if it's not their particular thing. So, I mean, I feel like this is one of those stories that I would love to hear how, I mean, this took a tremendous amount of passion to be able to do. So I would love to hear how excited they get telling us about all the details type thing.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
Another time.
Yeah. There's actually an interesting connection between this graphic novel and our last one that we're going to talk about. So, Ada Lovelace was the daughter of Lord Byron, who happens to be one of the main characters in Bloodlust and Bonnets. So Leigh is the one who introduced me to this. Thank you so much for sending me a copy. This was written and illustrated by Emily McGovern, which is really funny. Like, there was something about the style that seemed familiar. And then when I read the blurb that she did the My Life as a Background Slytherin webcomic, I was like, oh yeah, I loved reading those when they were coming out. So this is just a hoot and a half.
Mm-hmm.
It's super fun. So, Leigh, why don't you tell us about this very accurate historical fiction graphic novel?
Sure. Let's see. From the creator of the hit webcomic My Life as a Background Slytherin comes a hilarious pastiche. Is that the word? Pastiche?
Yeah, sure.
Of classic romantic literature led by a trio of queer misfits and several angry vampires. Bloodlust and Bonnets follows the clueless debutante Lucy, the ruthless bounty hunter Sham, and the exuberant poet Lord Byron as they flirt, bicker, and slash their way through early 19th century Britain in the pursuit of a notorious vampire, Lady Violet Travesty. Both witty and slapstick, elegant and gory, Emily McGovern's debut graphic novel pays tribute to and pokes fun at beloved romance tropes, delivering a joyous, action-packed world of friendship and adventure. I think that's well put.
Yes, very much so. So, how did you come to find this book?
This was one of those ones, when you buy enough crap on Amazon and then they give you an algorithm and they suggest things all the time. This has been about a year. This has been suggested to me. Like, if you like this, you might like this. I think I stuck it in a wish list somewhere or, an item cart, whatever type thing, and forgot about it. But every now and then it comes past. I'm like, oh, yeah, I got to get that. Oh, yeah, I got to get that. And so for Christmas, my dad works at a senior center. And so for gifts, they give him a lot of like little gift cards as a thank you and everything like that. And my dad's not a big, reader or anything like that. So he got a Barnes and Noble gift card and he's like, I don't know what to do with this. So he gave it to me and it was like $20. So I went to Barnes and Noble and I didn't have anything in particular that I needed. And I was wandering around and I was looking through all the comic section. And then lo and behold, Bloodlust and Bonnets is there. One copy left. Oh, under $20. Perfect. So I went and checked out with that, and the funny thing was the conversation that I had with the checkout gal. She was like, this looks fun. She was like, this kind of reminds me of Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. I was like, yes, but this one has vampires. She's like, oh my God, I have to read this. I'm like, right? So so this one got me very excited to read, and it was such fun from start to finish. I just I can't speak highly enough of this one. This one was highly entertaining. This one I think would make a great TV series or movie as well.
Yeah.
Something on sci-fi that's very tongue-in-cheek and poorly budget. Bad CGI, all that kind of stuff. That would be great.
Yeah, well, and kind of that like buddy cop kind of, you have this trio of people who are like, one of them is very earnest.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like Lucy is very earnest, but not always has the most common sense. Like, she's just like, oh yeah, this person invited me to their vampire cult. Awesome. And then somehow ends up fighting the vampires and all this stuff. And then, of course, Lord Byron comes in and is like, it's me from books. And it's just super awesome and dressing up in dresses and always wearing a kilt and just being very flamboyant and awesome. And then Sham, who is very taciturn and quiet and tough, but then also kind of silly in some ways. And so it's just like the perfect group of people who are really needing somebody to like have that common sense and logic to lead them along, but they don't, so they just kind of get into adventures, and it's absolutely
accidental
amazing.
Adventures, lots of accidental adventures.
Yes.
But a lot
And
of
then
like, I meant to do that.
Yes.
That was part of the plan all along.
Speaking of kind of simplicity and style, there's like no facial features really. They're just kind of like cuboid faces with eyes and no mouths and occasional eyebrows. And so, but there's something so engaging about all the characters and, the way that she adds like an eyebrow or a squint or, something like that, or in the body language, you can really tell, what is going on with the characters. And so it's really well drawn, and it's like the dialogue is hilarious and compelling. And then it's also somehow feels like super grounded and real. Like there's just something
Mm-hmm.
about the characters that just makes it feel like, man, I really want to meet these people and go on adventures.
It feels a lot to me like if Funko Pops were a comic.
Yeah.
And like you said, very simple backgrounds, very simple expressions, and simple body types and everything. But yet, like you said, it's almost like the dialogue. I think if you took the dialogue away, it wouldn't be as easy to
Mm.
navigate what's happening in each thing or feeling those expressions. But the dialogue is so well written that this was like a play in my mind. Like each one of these
Yeah.
characters has a voice in my head, and
Yep.
I could hear it each time they're going through, and like the sarcasm or the snootiness, like all the things in it. The passive aggressiveness is, I mean, it's just so. Yeah, I just couldn't stop. This was like a laugh out loud one sometimes, and I also enjoy that anytime it's going to the next scene, it's like sometime later, or meanwhile, you know.
Some more time later.
Yeah, exactly. So there's such a great like sarcasm through this whole thing that I just very very much enjoy. Like it's very tongue in cheek, and it's hilarious.
Yeah, I think what really upholds this comic too is the comedic timing. I mean,
Yes.
like you said, you don't really need. I think there's a lot of comics that you really have to balance like your story and your dialogue with your artwork,
Mm-hmm.
and the artwork is so charming in this,
Mm-hmm.
but the comedic timing, like the dungeon chapter
Mm-hmm.
where like Lady Travesty shows up and she's in the Iron Maiden dress, and then like as soon as she revealed and she was like, "How did you like my reveal?" I was like, "That's exactly what I was thinking. Like that was very cool." And then she drugged Lord Byron, so he shows up, and then Sham shows up, and it's just like this constant barrage of slapstick
Mm-hmm.
and perfect timing. And kind of the timing and the panel layout really reminded me of Bandette in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have kind of very even, not even panels, but pretty like square panels, and then getting that comedic timing
Mm-hmm.
for reading is just really difficult, and that is something that I think that Emily McGovern really excels at. And I think that's why My Life as a Background Slytherin was so
Mm-hmm.
successful, because she just has that whatever it takes to kind of really make that work.
Yeah, for me, it was the scene that I could totally like the comedic timing, and I could hear the voice in my head and everything. Was when they're going to that ball, and
Yeah.
Byron decides they're like, we have to dress fancy for this, and so they're pulling out all the clothes, to figure that out. And Byron just comes out in drag,
Yeah.
in a huge ball gown and wig with a giant feather in it and a big fan. And I was like, of course Byron did this.
Yep.
And you could just hear his voice while he's at the party, probably trying to make it higher and ridiculous and type thing.
Yeah.
He's so ridiculous. That's what I love about it. It's just like this series, or this whole thing is just like, how do we take ridiculousness up to the 10th degree? It's wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah, and definitely like all the characters have such distinct personalities.
Mm-hmm.
But they're also all so cool. Like
Mm-hmm.
even Byron has his charms, but
Mm-hmm.
like Sham is obviously amazing.
Mm-hmm.
BB is hilarious. Like
Mm-hmm.
even the vampires are really distinct and funny.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just like so much fun and really worthwhile. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
and Napoleon the Eagle,
Yeah.
the psychic eagle, and just the conversations that they have, and the magic castle
Yeah, the
that
magic
talks
castle is
really
what I was
sometimes. Like
thinking.
it's just it's so great.
Mm-hmm.
So
It's
I
very
do have to
creative.
thank Leigh and your algorithm for bringing this into our lives and sending me this copy, because this is definitely something I'm so excited to go back to.
Or that weird like succubus banshee
Yeah.
spirit that
Yeah.
she's trying to seduce me.
Well, and when Lucy's trying to seduce Sham, like in the kitchen,
Oh yeah,
and it's
so
just like, oh, let me take
awkward.
my hair out, and like leaning over and just so amazing.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
this one was really,
super fun.
yeah, it's so great. So great. If you liked Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, you will very much like this one. Or,
Yeah.
like, what was that other one? Abe Lincoln and the
Oh yeah,
Vampire
him with the
Hunter.
vampire
Yeah,
hunter.
which
Yeah.
wasn't, like, amazing, but it's in that same kind of genre.
Yeah.
So,
Hmm.
and I like anything with a
Historical
vampire. Everybody knows that.
fiction. Yeah. So yeah, this was a lot of fun. I think we kind of really ran the gambit of like very interesting and like very close to historical
Mm-hmm.
fact. And kind of a little more serious in tone with Queen of the Sea. You know, we got very heady and interesting stuff and kind of alternate universe stuff with Thrilling Adventures of Loveless and Babbage. And then all the way on the other end, this just like absolutely hilarious comedic brilliant thing of Bloodlust and Bonnet. So yeah, you know, we try to make sure that we are covering something for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been a lot of fun to kind of get into these themes and see what's out there and see where we can get people into comics and graphic novels.
Yes, and much like Byron, I'll say we meant to do that. That was part of the plan that we were supposed to have, you know, a serious one, a brainy one, and a funny one. That was, yeah, we planned that. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yep. Totally intentional.
Didn't just happen that way.
Awesome.
Anyway.
Well, are we ready to wrap up?
I think so. I'm not sure what else to do but giggle.
Yep.
Okay, shall I?
Let's do it.
Alrighty. This has been another exciting episode of File 741. I'm Leigh.
And I'm RJ.
Thank you for listening, and please like us on Facebook or follow us on Instagram and Twitter. You can tune into all of our podcasts on iTunes, Podbean, YouTube, or at thefeminerdfiles.net. Da-da-da-da-da-da. Charge. Okay,
Celebration
stopping it.
sound.
Yeah, we need like a little cannon. Confetti cannon.